that are not been here, this is the 6th or 7th class in a series on, it's called Between You and Me, Interpersonal Relationships. And we've been going through some pretty hard stuff. I'm going to start with a mashal, which is a parable. And this is a true parable that I experienced. And there is a great rabbi, Rabbi Twersky, who also speaks about this analogy. So I'm going to jump in with that. We'll do a quick recap and then we'll start new material. So many years ago, right? I lived in Israel 11 years ago, but I lived there for 12 years. So I'm in the beginning of my, decade plus in Israel. We didn't have a TV, right? We had little kids, no TV. It wasn't the thing in our community. No one had a TV. And how do you keep your kids occupied, right? So we got a fish tank, big fish tank, and they're like, cute, colorful fish. And my kids used to watch it like a TV, right? I'd wake up in the morning and like at least 2 of the 4 little kids were just standing there watching it. And for fun, we bought a teeny little lobster. Okay, it was so cute. We had a whole apparatus. The lobster would like climb to the top. It was almost like he was like, ahoy, mateys. Like he was so personality plus. And my kids just loved, like every day, they were just glued to this lobster. It was so cute with its little, never eaten a lobster, right? They didn't even know what a lobster was. But here we had this teeny little miniature lobster. I know you could get lobsters in Jerusalem, seriously. Yes, you can. So one day I woke up and my son was like frantic. He said, Mommy, there's 2 lobsters. And I came running to the fish tank. Like, what is he talking about? And literally there was Mr. Lobster, personality plus, and right next to him was another identical lobster. And I looked closer because what happened? Like, there's only 1 lobster. Like, did he have, like, how is this possible? Right? And it was his shell. He shed his shell. And it was actually so amazing to see in detail, like, how you have like your fingerprints, like if you look at your finger, you see the little lines, the shell had every single line on it. It was the exact clone copy of the lobster right next to him. And it was eerie. And then it got really gross because the lobster went on to eat his shell, right? And that's when I'm like, kids, let's go, ooh, gross. So the analogy that Rabbi Twersky has spoken about very publicly about this analogy is that we human beings, we go through life, and here's the words that he uses: life is a series of productive discomfort. When we get to a place where we feel in pain, like our soul, our body, or what we want to do, our purpose, our mission, and we need to get out of our comfort zone. There's no other option. We can't stay in that small place anymore. What we need to do is we need to shed what was, and we need to grow a new self. And this is what we do throughout our lives. Think about all the decades of your life. Every crossroad, every challenge, there were 2 options, right? When you're at that crossroads, what are you going to do? Are you going to stay small? Or are you going to get out of your comfort zone and overcome something that's in front of you? And when you get through it, you are now a different person. So that is the analogy for growth. It's the lobster, okay? And you can look it up online, Google Rabbi Twersky lobster, you'll hear all of his ideas about it. But I saw this firsthand and it really struck me. This is what we're doing. Last week when we came together, I said, so okay, we've been doing all these weeks on personal growth and interpersonal relationships and changing our character. Who here feels like we've accomplished anything? And no one raised their hands, right? We all feel like, no, there's so much work to do. And last week, we spoke about the blockages, what we have to overcome. Anyone remember what we spoke about last week? We spoke about the evil inclination. It keeps tripping us up. We spent a lot of time talking about that. And last week, we also spoke about Machloket, which is conflict or fragmentation, which, as our sages have taught us, is even worse than idol worship. This is so despised by God because God wants unity. He wants his children, the Jewish people, to be one. And when we are fragmented, when we can't come together, can't respectfully make space for another person, it's very, very painful for God. So that's what we spoke about last week. We spoke, there was a lot that we spoke about. There was also one more thing that we started talking about, the 3 traits that take us out of this world. Literally, they ruin our life here and our world to come. And those 3 traits, if anyone remembers, so in Hebrew it was kin'ah is jealousy, taiva is desire, lust, and kavod is honor. Those 3 traits, our sages tell us, they suck the life out of us. So we have these forces that we have no choice. And this is the lobster analogy. When we get there and we're like feeling so in the moment of pain or regret or fear or discomfort, the only option is to stay in pain, which I think a lot of people choose. They choose to stay in their small place, or to shed whatever it is, the old you, get out of your comfort zone and move forward into a bigger you, like the lobster. Okay, so at the end of last week's class, and for all the 7 days that have passed since last week's class, I have met some ladies that have been in the class, and everyone has the same question. And I've heard this probably 10 times since last class. They said, Eve, is it peace at all costs? And in my interviews and in my conversations and on Shabbat, again and again, people are saying, but I have this sister that is so terrible to me. And I have this uncle that is just, he's toxic. And we have a parent that, unfortunately is unwell. And everyone has another story. And it's almost like everyone has that uncle. Everyone has that person. This is a huge hurdle. It's a huge challenge. So the question we're going to tackle today is it peace at all costs? We know, and we said last week, that peace is the vessel for all blessing. Shalom, this concept, shalom, is so huge, right? Because what does the word shalom mean? If you look at the Hebrew letters, shalom, it spells something else. It spells shalem, which is completion. So God wants a whole. We want to be complete. We want to feel good inside and out. And when things are not okay, surface, not surface, inside out, it doesn't feel good. So we want to get to this beautiful place, no conflict, everything is resolved. We're so idealistic, but then the questions start coming and everyone has that person in their life. I'm not alone, right? Okay, good. Okay, so that's what we're going to talk about today. Okay, peace at all costs. So to talk about this, we need to speak about boundaries. And a couple weeks ago, we had a guest speaker here on Shabbat, Jenna McKenna. She spoke about the forefather Yitzchak, okay? And he represented boundaries. Does anyone recall what Abraham, first of the forefathers, represented? Kindness, keep going with that. Chesed, chesed is the word, but that is kindness, definitely. So we have Abraham, kindness. We have Yitzchak, Isaac, boundaries, gevura, strength. And then this past week, we're talking about Jacob, Yaakov. Anyone know what Jacob represents? Well, think about what we learned about this week in the Torah portion. What happens? Struggle. He's wrestling with God. He's wrestling with himself. His word is actually tiferet, which means splendor. And I think tiferet, and this is we could do a whole class. Maybe my husband will do the class on this because it's a very, very mystical concept. What is splendor? What is this trait that he embodies? I think it's the two. It's the force, it's the two together. That was his struggle. He was wrestling with the angel, wrestling with God, wrestling with himself. Remember this week, we spoke all about his low self-esteem, what was going on in his head, wrestling with who he was, his identity, his brother, coming out, like holding on to the heel of his brother, right? Always struggling with who he was. He took the birthright from his brother. He was having an identity crisis, right? And struggling with God, which we can all relate to. when bad things happen, I don't even want to turn on the news nowadays, right? I feel like every single day for the last couple of days, one tragedy after another. Did you hear about the bus this last night in Europe, in Turkey? Terrible. Just it's it's just, there's tragedy and tragedy, and it's impossible as a thinking person who knows that there's a God in this world. It's impossible not to struggle. We are called Yisrael. Jacob was named Yisrael, which means to wrestle. It means to struggle. And the Jewish people are named after him, the children of Israel, B'nai Yisrael. Because when we stop struggling, it's over. We never should be complacent. We never should be like, this is great, everything is okay. Our job is to fight, is to struggle, it's to question. That means we're still in a relationship with God. Okay, so let's talk about boundaries for a minute. This is actually, if you know me, I mean, Julie is already getting to know me really well. I said, Julie, do you have like a running list of like all my quirks? And she's like, oh, it's coming along. So yeah, no, we're a great team. But boundaries is actually not my strength, right? Not my strength, right? You probably know. Viola is like, oh yeah, I can tell. It's a good thing to want to give, but sometimes it could burn you. Last year, I remember I was so burnt by a situation in our community that I just felt like my prayer at that moment of I gave so much and I came out so burnt. I said, I'm never going to recover from this. And my prayer, I remember my prayer was, Hashem, please don't let me be so jaded from this. I don't want to change who I am. I want to give. I don't want to feel so boundary that I'm so careful and cautious about giving, because that is the pitfall. That's the opposite end. When we're so boundaried, we're missing out. We're not becoming the giving people that we want to be. But I'll tell you, chesed also has a flip side. And my sister, she would joke with me. So I lived in Jerusalem, as I said, for so many years. I lived in a very ultra-Orthodox community. So you guys see me with my like orange nail polish, and I love color. I'm very loud. And in the community that we were living in, it wasn't the thing to be so loud. Like, it was kind of like, people were much more like toned down, and me being me, I couldn't figure it out. Like, it's just my nature. Like, I'd be walking to my apartment and I see my neighbor across the street and I'd be like, Mr. Greenhouse, how are you? My sister, who was also living in Jerusalem, she's like, Eve, we're not in Thornhill. Like, calm down. Like, this is not how it's done. And she used to say about me, she said, Eve, your chesed gone wrong. Like, that's what she would call me. Like, there's chesed and there's chesed gone wrong. When you have no boundaries, or it's just like, boundaries are good. They're important. So we have these boundaries. We're going to talk about these boundaries now. Protecting yourself, but not too much. In another class that we had in the beginning when I first came, we spoke about giving, right? And I remember I brought in the kids' book, The Giving Tree. Was anyone in that class when I brought it out as an example? So that book that a lot of us grew up with, you grew up with it? You have it in your house? Okay. So most of us have it in our library. Shel Silverstone, what a famous author. It's actually a terrible, terrible book, right? Seriously, the message of the book is, if you give and give and give, you will be a shmata. You will be a tree stump. You will be nothing. The more you give, the less you are. That is the message. And that is not what Judaism tells us. So I actually saw last week that, I don't know which, The Hub, like a literary, kind of online magazine, The Hub, they rewrote the book. Finally, after how many decades? That book is probably close to 100 years old. I don't know how old it is, but many, many decades we've been reading this book, and they reread it. They rewrote it, and I'll tell you how they ended it, okay? So this is how the new ending goes. Setting healthy boundaries is a very important part of giving. It assures you'll always have something left to give. And so the tree was happy. Everyone was. The end. So this, I wonder if it's going to be changed in the real book, right? It was the actual book, and it had a whole different spin to the story. When it was like, should you give? He's like, actually, I can't give, because I want to make sure that this tree will keep giving apples and keep giving shade and I want to make sure. So it's a beautiful new ending that we could think about, because when we're talking about protecting ourselves from people, from toxicity, right? From people that are bad for us. It's so hot in here. Are you guys cold, hot? You like it? Whatever you want. I'm like, I don't know how to do this one. Okay. Does anyone remember what we said the Hebrew word to love means? Love, ahava in Hebrew. The root of it, we said this a few weeks ago, the root hav is an Aramaic word that means to give, okay? We want to give because giving is loving, right? And giving is a beautiful thing. Dr. Edith Eger, right, the author of The Choice, I once had a Zoom session with her, and she and so fabulous. Maybe we could do that here for L'chaim. But something that really stood out to me, she said, give while your hands are still warm. So beautiful. And that makes me think of my bubbies. When I had two bubbies my entire life until I was 38 years old, 39 years old, I had my bubbies. They were my best friends. And if I was ever with my bubby, and I would just be trying to be nice, like, Bubby, I love your scarf. There's no way in hell that I wasn't walking out wearing that scarf around me. She would take anything off, take it, even like, you need it. It's going to be so good on you. Her shoes, once she gave me, I was like, how are you going to get home, Bubby? Right? Didn't matter, right? That was the character of giving, giving, giving. And the flip side, right? There's always two sides, right? This was an adage, a saying that for those of you children of Holocaust survivors, do you know the saying, alles for the Kinder, right? Did you grow up with that? Which means everything for the children, okay? That's how my parents believed. Was it the best thing ever? Was it the best thing ever, Doris? You think yes. What do you think? Questionable. I never learned self-care because everything was for the children. My parents would have given the shirts off their back for us. And it was their greatest pleasure, but there has to be this balance. Like, I never once saw my parents go on a vacation. I never once saw them then spend money on themselves. They wouldn't have enjoyed. They wouldn't. I know. But then the next generation, like, I remember actually coming to my husband's family for the first time with such a heart. My mother-in-law was living in South Africa, very different lifestyle, maids, butlers, like very, very, a tennis court, a swimming pool, like when I came for the first time. And it was Friday afternoon. And I remember my mother-in-law, like, the maid was putting everything was perfect, ready to go. I've never seen Shabbat like that. My mother worked full time. She would come like huffing and puffing to light the Shabbos candles, not ready for Shabbos. Like, she just was working to the bone. And my mother-in-law, on the other hand, so different. It was like 3 hours before Shabbat, and she took a nap. And then she said, I'm going to get a manicure. And I was like, oh my gosh. She is so selfish. Like, isn't there things that need to be done over here? Like, how could you just walk out on Erev Shabbat? Like, and then it took me a decade to make peace with the way I was raised and the way my husband was raised. And he's like, Eve, take care of yourself, take better care of yourself. And I felt that was the most selfish thing I could ever do. Right? So boundaries and healthy and finding that proper way. Right? And the Maimonides always taught us in Judaism, the middle road is the right path. Don't be extreme, right? Those were two extremes. And I'm spending so much work, so much investment trying to find that right path, right? It could take your whole life. Okay, so I'm going to give you guys some Torah examples, and some of these are pretty hard, okay? So one of them, I'm just going to read it to you in the book. This is a story that comes out of from the time period of Rabbi Akiva. So I guess it's the Talmud. This is the example. Two people are traveling in a desert. One of them had a jug of water containing only enough for one to survive. If they share the contents of the jug, they will both die. So one of the sages, Ben Petura, originally taught that they should share the water. What do you guys, who's with him? Raise your hand if you're with Ben Petura. Share the water. Okay, that was his, right? There's always two Jews, three opinions. So that's what he says. Because each is prohibited from allowing the other to die. They must act to keep each other alive, regardless of the consequences. However, Rabbi Akiva, who was the one that we went with, he taught your brother shall live with you. Those are actually the Torah words from the Parshat Vayikra. It says, let your brother live with you. That is the Torah mitzvah. And we need to decide, what does that mean? But he says, your life precedes your brother's. Therefore, the owner of the jug must drink the water and not share it. How do you guys feel about this? I know, Jen, you have such a big heart. I know it's hard. Like how, but let's give some other examples about this, because there's actually a lot that, unfortunately, that we've had to deal with during Jewish history. Yeah, Marcy. Yeah. Oxygen. I know, that's great. That's in my notes. I was going to say that. That's the perfect example. Why? If the airplane is going down, are you going to really be so selfish to put your mask on before your child? Right? That's very it's not like intuitively, would you do that? No, but it makes a lot of sense. You're not going to be able to help your child if you're gasping for oxygen. Okay, so that was an excellent example. What else do you guys think of? Well, I mean, there's X amount of water, there's X amount of desert, and do the math. Like you can't, you can't both survive. Very difficult. And this is such a, yeah, Regina. Okay, for those of you over there that couldn't hear, she said it depends who you're with, meaning if you really like the person. No, how would you choose? But on the airplane, even if you're with your child, okay. So it's the amount of love would help you decide. Like, okay, I hear it. I totally hear it. I think as human beings we love people, we all feel that way. But it's interesting that this is the way Jewish law says. Your life takes precedence. You need to survive. In fact, there's another Torah statement, mitzvah. It's a mitzvah that says this, okay? Im ba lahargecha, if someone is coming to kill you, hashkem lahargo, you have to kill him first. So let's just put that down. I mean, no one's killing each other here, but this is life and death. And you need to take total precautions and ensure that your life keeps going. It's hard. It's a hard one. And do you have something you want to add, Marilyn? Oh, no. It's an excellent question. Wow, this is okay. First of all, there are books written about complicated situations, life and death situations. If someone needs like a heart, right? And this is a 95-year-old senile man. Okay, he's a vegetable, and he has a heart that's working. Could you take that heart, according to Jewish law, and take his life and transfer it to a 20-year-old that was just in a car accident whose heart failed? Could you do that? No. Everyone agrees? How can we decide whose blood is redder? How can we decide whose life takes precedence? Right? There are books and books, volumes written about all the delicacies of life and death questions. So I'm with you, Regina. It's really not so simple, but it makes sense. Give it to the younger person, but we actually cannot do that. Okay, Marilyn, what do you? But I think the answer is not like that's how we all think, I think. But I think the answer is not, it's not a practical necessarily. Like, this is what makes most sense, because we can never judge. We can never make that call. But let's talk about some of the very difficult situations that we've lived through. Has anyone read the book Sophie's Choice? Okay, so I personally, I don't remember reading this book, but Susie Futterman, we were learning together, and she mentioned that book about, maybe someone could speak about it. A mother had to choose which of her children was going to survive and which one was not. How? And then in my own studies of the Holocaust, there are books called Responsa of the Holocaust. And it's the issues that came up to rabbis living in Warsaw during the ghetto times, during terrible times, that had to make decisions. If the SS guard said, I need 10 people, you need to choose me 10 men or 100 men, be outside in this, otherwise I'm going to take the whole community. How on earth was he supposed to make these decisions? It was, I mean, some of them really just lost their minds because it was too hard to choose the people that were going to go to their death. There's this story that I once heard that really, let this sit with you, because it's actually a little hard. There was a mother during a poverty-stricken time. She had mouths to feed. Her kids were crying from hunger. And all they had in the house was one egg. So the mother doesn't know what to do. And she takes this egg and she goes into the kitchen and she closes the door. And the kids are saying, Mommy, Mommy, and they're waiting for her. And finally she comes out and they said, what did you do? And she said, I made you a mother. He ate the egg. Yeah, it's like, I mean, these questions are just like, how do you feel about that? If she's on empty, if she has nothing to give, her kids will have nothing. But if she could take the little she has and strengthen herself, she could probably go out and find some more scraps. She could have a little bit more strength to carry on, right? So these are hard things, choices that, please God, we will never need to make. Boundaries, knowing when to step up and protect yourself, and knowing when not to. So let's go back to our mitzvah, the topic of the day, V'ahavta l'reacha kamocha. Love your neighbor as you love yourself. That's what it's all about, okay? And we're getting into all the different amazing sidetracks that have to do with this topic. Love your neighbor as you love yourself. We're still not there yet. Okay, so here's a boundary. Here's a story I'd like to put out there. Let's see how you feel. Rabbi Shimshon David Pincus, I've quoted him many times. Our son is named for him, someone that had a huge influence on our spiritual life. He was a poor man. He had, 8 or 10 children. He lived in a town called Ofakim, very, very poverty-stricken town. He was a rabbi in Israel, a rabbi. They were living penny to penny. And there was a story that was written. He just passed away 20 years ago, Rabbi Pincus. But after he passed away, his life story, we knew him while he was alive, thank God. But after he passed away, there's bookshelves of books of his Torah wisdom that was taken off of his computer. He has become a legend. No one knew him when he was alive. He was very unknown. Okay, so this is a story that came out. His students wrote this story down, brought it to life. There was a situation in his town. Husband and wife fighting terribly. Shalom bayis out the window. Terrible situation. They're going towards divorce. They've tried therapy. They've tried this. They've tried that. They're done. And he steps in. What's going on? And he spoke to the wife and to the husband separately. And the wife is saying, I can't do anything right. Whatever I do, is that me? Someone's phone. Not mine. Same ring. Okay. It might be yours. I don't know. Doesn't matter. He said, right? The wife is saying, whatever I cook for him, he's complaining. He's always in a bad mood. I can't do anything right. I am done. He is not a good person. I do not want to spend the rest of my life with him. And then he meets with the husband, and the husband is like, I'm in so much pain all the time. His mouth, he had such dental work that needed to be done, and they had no money to take care of it, that anything he ate hurt him. He was always in pain, chronic pain, right? And nothing was easing it. And everything, he was just in a bad mood all the time. And no money equals very, very difficult shalom bayis, right? One thing leads to the other. So what did Rabbi Pincus do? Unbelievable. He never told a soul about this story. It was his students that told the world what he did. He wrote him a check that covered all his dental work. It was $20,000. This is a man that was, I don't know how he survived day to day, but he said, I will figure it out. Here is all my life savings. So his students, they heard, or they were there, they saw what was going on, and they said, why would you do that? You have children to marry off. You have a house that's falling apart. Your kids need you, schooling, this, that. And he said, if it was your brother, wouldn't you do it? That's what he said. If it was your brother, would you do it? You wouldn't? Okay, maybe half, okay? But think about this. If it was your brother, your sister, your person, your mother, and we're gonna get to parents now, because our topic for today is honoring our parents. It's a hard one, right? You're shaking your head, right? Of course. And I think in a previous class, maybe on Shabbat, we spoke about charity being, we're supposed to give 1/10, right? And you actually cannot give more than 1/5. So there are laws about giving. You can't just give and give and give. You need to make sure that you're okay. That's boundaries, okay? But wow, that story. Okay, so let's talk about our topic for today, which is honoring our parents. Okay, so I hope, yes. So let me tell you a little story. This morning, I had a coffee date with a very special woman in West Rogers Park. And she is one of 9 children. She herself has 9 children. She comes from a huge, huge family. I mean, she has hundreds of cousins and whatever, tremendous people, leaders. And she said that her parents lived in a small town and they were the pillars of their community. And they gave so much, forget not financial, but they gave their whole life to the community, that her and her 8 siblings always felt so resentful. Okay, because there's money that we could give, and there's time, there's our energy, there's our listening ear. If you're listening to everyone else and you have nothing for your kids, it's a problem. So we were talking about it, and she said all of her siblings and herself feel at the ends of, now they're all parents in their own right and leading their own lives, that they got more out of it than they didn't. Now that they're adults, they saw, how are they so strong in their lives and givers in their own right? It's because of what they saw. So they were bitter for a period of time, but now that they're on the other side, they say, wow, that was truly amazing. And they feel like they all came out stronger because of it. Okay, so that's just, there's time, there's money, there's lots of our resources. We could keep it, we could be stingy. The word for stinginess is a kamtsan. Kamtsan means like closed, tight. No one wants to be that. That is an ugly trait. We don't want to come to the end of our life with so much in our bank account and we haven't impacted the world. Thank you so much. Okay, so let's go to honoring your mother and father. Can we shift into that? It's a hard one for some, and I actually think it's a hard mitzvah for everyone, because it's one of the most important mitzvahs. It's one of the top 10, right? The fifth commandments, right? Do you guys remember a couple of weeks ago when we went through the commandments, right? Honor your parents, 5, or else they might give you a patch. But we never do that. No, not nowadays, but yes. Here are the quotes from the Torah about honoring parents, okay? I'm gonna read you, there's numerous times in the Torah that it says these words, Honor your mother and father so that your days will be lengthened. Okay, note to self. If you do that, the reward for honoring your parents is arichut yamim, lengthened days, long life. It's a pretty good reward. Okay, so that's one. Here's another one that was in Shemos. Here in the book of Devarim, we have kaved et avicha ve'atimecha, right? Honor your mother and father. Kasher tziva Hashem Elokecha, like God commanded you. Laman ya'arichun yamecha, so that your days will be lengthened. Ulaman yituv lach, and it will be good for you. That's another way that the Torah brings it out. Book of Vayikra, here's another quote about your parents. Ish imo va'aviv tira'u. Revere, fear, honor your mother and father. Okay, so those are some of the verbiage in the Torah. Honor them, it'll be good for you, you'll have lengthened days, and there's honoring and there's fear. We see that again and again and again throughout the Torah. Now, if we move to the Shulchan Aruch, okay, the Shulchan Aruch, the code of Jewish law, which is where most of the halacha is written and brought down, okay? There are actually 6 words that come down from this mitzvah, okay? 6 words. There's 6 categories, okay? Food, drink, clothing, covering, bringing in, and escorting out. Those are the 6 categories, and there's honestly hundreds of fine-tuning things that could go into all of those categories. And actually, I found this book in the Beacon's house. It's actually, I'll have to give it to Hannah, inscribed to Hannah. But I was looking at this, a whole book just on this mitzvah. Unbelievable stories and advice, and it really goes through everything, okay, that comes down from those 6 things. So think about it. They fed you, they dressed you, they carried you, they chauffeured you, right? And we could never repay them, right? And sometimes when my kid gives me a hard time, like if I don't know how to like download an app, you know, like I'm not so tech savvy, and my kids will like roll their eyes, and I'm like, I taught you how to use a spoon, okay? Or like if like a kid is like, you know, all like, ooh, I don't want to eat that, you touched it, you know? I'm like, you lived in my stomach for 9 months, okay? Stop being so like, ew, gross, right? So yeah, totally. So, okay, so here are the laws. We're gonna break down the laws, okay, from the Shulchan Aruch, okay? And some of these might be new to you, and some of these, even at your whatever age we're at, you can say, I'm going to try to do this. If hopefully, and by the way, and I know some people here do not have their parents anymore. And this mitzvah carries on as long as you are alive, you have the obligation to honor your parents. So even if they're not physically here, you honor their memory, you do things in their merit, so it never, ever ends. But as long as they are here, it's a great opportunity. It's also the greatest example you could give to your children. When my grandmother passed away, it was just 2 years ago, just exactly 2 years ago now, we just had her yahrzeit. It was such a beautiful coming together. All my siblings came in, my brothers from Israel, my sister from Toronto, I flew in, we were all there for this amazing Shabbat. My grandmother for sure planned it, exactly how it happened, exactly bringing all her grandchildren together, the ones from Montreal, we all spent Shabbat together. She passed away on a Thursday, we buried her on Friday, and we were stuck in Montreal in a kosher hotel because we're kosher and none of the rest of the family is, and we're the only ones keeping Shabbat. But because of that, and because how it all fell, everyone, even my cousin that's intermarried, everyone was there. Everyone came with their children, with everything to have a Shabbat together. It was so beautiful, it was so perfect. And I remember, like, after the whole, big family thing was over and it was just me and my 4 siblings, I remember sitting at my parents' table with my siblings and my parents, and it was very emotional. My parents, actually, you guys are gonna meet them in a week, they're coming. They're such great people. They gave us the greatest gift. A year before my grandmother passed away. My parents moved my babi gota to Toronto from Montreal and totally renovated the house for her. Like guardrails to hold on to, walk-in shower for her wheelchair, made the living room into a bedroom, hospital grade bed, everything. My parents are not wealthy people. They took out another mortgage at their not such a young age to accommodate my bubby. And they thought she was going to live forever, but they would have done anything for her. There was no expense that was kept. She didn't like this. Oh, let's carpet the floor now. Let's make it so comfortable for you. And I remember that last morning before I flew home and everyone was flying back, I remember saying to my parents, you didn't realize what you were doing. You gave us the greatest gift. And really, ultimately, they gave themselves the greatest gift. Because now me and my siblings, we know that when it's their time and they're going to need us, we have the greatest example of really, really stepping up and doing everything. There's nothing they wouldn't have done. And they're the greatest role models for us. I hope we could emulate them. I hope we could come close to doing what they did. This is a big mitzvah. Okay. So we're going to break it down into laws. Okay. So the first one is you are obligated, chayav adam la'amod, to stand before his parents. That is one law. Okay. Is anyone aware of this? That there is a mitzvah, an obligation in the Shulchan Aruch, in the Code of Jewish Law, to stand up when your parents enter a room. That's okay. Think about that for a second. Okay. If sometimes people will stand up for the rabbi, it depends how much you like your rabbi. Think about it. If presidents, the president would walk in right now, what would you just carry on yenting? Right? No, we'd all right? Or like Oprah is like knocking on your door, like whatever. You'd be so excited. Of course you'd get up, right? The Queen of England. Oh, so that's what they do. Everyone stands in her presence. So that reverence, that showing of respect is what the Shulchan Aruch, the Code of Law, tells us we need to do for our parents. Okay, that's what. Who does that? Yeah? Does he stand up when you walk in? That's so beautiful. So beautiful. Yes.
When you're care about them, you said
Right. So you're saying it's kind of cultural. Like there's a cultural part to it. Right. Yeah, yes, ma'am. Right. So oh. Right. So there's society norms and there's cultural norms and there's also something that we call Yeridat Hadorot, which means every generation we go down as far as like self-respect. Yeah. Like Judy said that her son stands up for her, but I'm curious if their son stands up for right? But the truth is, I mean, my kids go to the same school that your grandson went to last year. And in that school, they teach the kids that as teacher walks in, everyone stands up. Every Jewish school will teach that, right? Okay, yeah, that's another one. Okay, just you want to explain that? So basically that you should not sit in your parents' chair, as you can't just sit in their chair. Like, this is father's chair. So if we're like, there's like only one chair available, and your father's out of town or whatever, or he's doing something else, he's not coming to the table, you would need to ask permission. Like, would it be okay, Father, if I would sit in your chair? That this happens all the time in my house. So my kids won't sit in their parents' chair, and they're not at the point of standing up for their parents, but it's something that is taught. It's like a muscle. So they're learning it in school, that you stand up for people that you respect. So at least there's like a little bit like in place, and maybe at a certain age. What do you mean? Yeah. Oh, yeah. That's definitely, yeah. Well, we'll get to that. We're gonna do, I think even next week, we'll probably go to the different laws of guests and all that. So we'll talk about that, like accompanying someone on their way. Okay, so let's go on. So what Paula said is actually the next mitzvah. So the first one is to stand. The second one is to show gratitude. Okay, so this is the hard part. Coming back to my original question, what do you do if a relationship is toxic for you? Okay, so this is a hard one. If someone has had a nightmare relationship with their parents, my heart goes out to you, and we should talk privately, because I can't sum it up in a few lines, but there is space for you to separate yourself from that parent. But the law of honoring your parents is, even if they gave you up for adoption, they dropped you off at someone's doorstep, they never were a part of your life, they didn't pay child support, they were terrible parents, right? Even if that is the case, they brought you into this world. Even for that, I know, it's so hard. I know. Oh, okay, there is space to pull away. If you need to take care of yourself emotionally, physically, you do that. That is number one. We spoke about that, right? Knowing when to come forward, knowing when to step down, knowing when to put boundaries in place. That is number one. It needs to be healthy. You need to take care of yourself. But according to the laws of honoring your parents, even if you think your parent was an awful parent, there's still room to have some honor. And instead of honor, let's use the word gratitude that Paula used. Gratitude, like, you're alive. You were given a gift, right? They messed up. They need to do their own work. They need to fix and heal, and we can't be accountable for everyone. All this work is personal work, right? We're doing work with others, but it's really your own personal work that you're doing. Yes. Yeah.
What about?
Why honor that mother? Not necessarily, right? Maybe she knew what was going on. I mean, there's all types of cases, right? So of course there's exceptions, and that's actually the way I wrote it. I wrote exceptional situations, like taking care of yourself. So 100%, you need to do your healing, and sometimes your healing means never to have anything to do with that person. But those are exceptional situations, and I'll have to say that even in those exceptional situations, this is me reading it from the source, it says that you need to pull away to take care of yourself emotionally and physically, and get into a better space, but hopefully not forever. So there's a certain healing that hopefully, but probably not always, that you could get to, even on a deathbed. Like, sometimes you just need to be heard. You hurt me. You need to have that conversation. You need to get it off your chest for your own personal healing, right? So there's space. Yes.
And so the person who's writing this, if they can, as a person, they can accept.
Totally.
Is that for anybody else?
Right. shedding that shell,
Mhm.
shedding that lobster shell, and becoming the best you, right? And yeah, and at certain points, maybe you could, like, I don't know, have a conversation, have a face-to-face. It's so healing for the person, right? To be able to face it. Right. Right. Should have. Right, right. It would look very different.
But
Yes.
you don't have to. Just, in other words.
Well,
always accept me when I hear something like, my mother didn't have it.
mm,
May have been, and you may know it.
mm, okay. I hear that. Let's, I want to get to, I have so many examples that I like, that is one of them, right? Paula said, if her mother was a terrible person, she doesn't need to say it. Like, she knows it. Like, what's the good of just, right, right. Well, unless it's for your healing, that you need to get it off your chest, you need to talk about it. That's, there is space for that. Right, right, totally. Ah, that is so, that's huge. Okay, it does, that's actually, I did read about that a little bit. Do you have this book? Oh, that's fabulous. It doesn't say, think about it. Love your, right? Love your fellow as you love yourself. Love Hashem, right? That's one of the laws in the Torah, right? We say that in Shema, but it doesn't say to love your parents. We don't have to love our parents. We have to honor them, and we need to fear them, revere them. So that's huge. That's so huge. Okay. Anyone else before we move on to some examples? Yeah, yeah.
I want to ask you, honor your.
No.
I have gratitude for you.
I want to give you guys some more examples. Okay. So maybe this is some ways that you could honor. Okay. So we spoke about standing, which is like a presence, like that's a deed, right? Like to stand. There's gratitude, which is kind of like an attitude. And then there is speech, how you talk about that, right? Which is what Paula just said. Like, you don't have to say my mother was a terrible person. Like, it doesn't always help to speak badly about people. Okay, like if your words detract from their honor, leave it out. So kind of select, almost like gossip, right? It is gossip, right? So, okay, so here's some practicality, some ways, okay? These are just some examples. So, and this is something that happens a lot. I'm pretty busy sometimes, and my mother calls me very often, and sometimes it's very hard to always answer the call. So that's one way that actually it's brought down. Like, if your parents call you, whether you're in the house with them and they're calling your name, you can't ignore it. Like, you should take that phone call. You should answer them. Okay, so that was one way. Another way, and this is something really important as our parents get older, it's on us to raise their mood, to cheer them up when they're dispirited. And this happens. Like, as people get older, sometimes they lose hope, they're in pain, they're seeing things, they're just coming towards, a very different time in their life, and it's hard, and there's change. So it's our we have to figure out ways to kind of bring up their spirit. Okay, so nachas, the Hebrew word nachas, right? Oh, is it Hebrew, Yiddish? Yiddish, pride, like Jewish pride, right? So, we think that children are like nachas machines, and they're not, turns out, right? It's not like you put in coins and, oh, that's amazing. They just give you so much nachas, not like that. But our job as children is actually not to be nachas machines, but to give joy to our parents. The opposite of not giving joy is giving tsar, giving pain. And we should never be the cause of our parents' pain. So here's an example, okay? This is something when my teens come home, I experience this all the time. I can't sleep until they're home at night, right? It's late at night. And I'm like, are you okay? You're not answering my phone calls. And it's like 1 in the morning. And I'm thinking all the bad things in the world, right? And I would say, like, call when you get there. Like, just let me know. Even if your phone is dead or whatever it is, no excuses. Go into a gas station and pick up the phone. Just let me know you're alive. Because by not, you're giving your parents pain, tsar. So you don't need to be a nachas machine, but you also should not be bringing pain to your parents. And there's a lot about this actually, because let's say you're a doctor and your parent has, I don't know, a surgery that needs to be done. You are technically, according to Jewish law, not supposed to be the one to do the surgery. If someone is just as good, if there's a doctor that is just as good as you, let them do it. It should cause, you should not be the one cutting your parents open. Obviously, unless you're the only one that could do it and you're saving their lives, of course you do it. But even the smallest thing, like taking a splinter out of your mother's hands, if someone else is able to do it, like your child, that is preferable. Your child does not have the same laws of honoring the grandparents as you have honoring your parents. Okay, it's still strong, but not, we're talking about parent-child right now. So we cannot cause any tsar, any pain physically and emotionally. Okay, here's another few good examples of what we can do. We could ask our parents for a blessing. I actually wanted to bring in a little picture that I found. I'll send it on our chat, right? Is everyone here on our chat? I'm gonna send it. It's really a very personal picture. It's from when I went off when I was 18 years old. And I went off to Israel, right, to study. And I'm in the Pearson Airport in Toronto. And I went to my father and I said, can I have a blessing? And he put his hands on my head and we're both crying, like crying so hard, like you couldn't, like, it was like, wow, like dad, like, you know, crying, like, and I just knew, like, I'm never coming home. I just knew it in my heart. And he knew it also. So I just found that picture, but asking for a blessing, right? When a couple months ago, when we brought my parents to America to get their vaccine because they were in Canada and they couldn't get it, and they were like, it was really, really hard on them. And so we got them a house nearby. They weren't like seeing us like from up close. They wouldn't even walk into our house, wouldn't walk into our car. Like it was really, they were so afraid. Like they came in the middle of the night with like 4 masks on, a visor. Like they hadn't even taken a sip of water for 12 hours of travel because they were so afraid. And that Friday that we were together, and I said, Dad, I hadn't been with my parents in almost 2 years. I said, Dad, I want a blessing. And he wouldn't even touch me. Like it was like this, like from afar, like he gave me the blessing. So asking your parents to bless you is something, that's an honor, right? And we see that in the parsha, the Torah portion last week, when Asa realizes that he sold his birthright for a bowl of lentil soup, he flips out and he goes to his father and he says, please, will you still give me a blessing? Even Asa, right? Even the wicked Asa goes, and by the way, Asa, he did a lot of bad in his life. Talk about rape and theft and everything bad you could ever imagine. And yet he excelled in the mitzvah of honoring his parents, so much so that his hands and his head are buried in Ma'arat Machpelah with all the forefathers and foremothers, because he used his head and his hands to serve his father and his mother, to talk to them, to be with them. They rolled in to Ma'arat Machpelah. It's like, have you ever heard of this? It's crazy, right? You've heard of it, yeah? Because he used those parts of him to serve his parents. Where's the rest of him? I don't know. Probably not getting such a dignified burial. The whole, he was like, who knows where he was not exactly following Jewish law in any way, shape, or form, but his mitzvah was honoring his parents. Okay, and I see that people are getting ready to leave. So a couple more things and we will, okay, here's one more. Ask them for advice. Okay, how does that feel when your parents ask you, when your children ask you for advice, right? So that's a beautiful thing you could do. Okay, here's something not to do. Okay, this one, just like the standing up one, you're like, I never did that my whole life. So this might also be one that's a little hard. Do not address your parents in their first name. Of course, in today's generation, right? I'm still telling my kids like to call people like, you know, like, I don't like it when my kids call you Julie. I'm like, Mrs. Crennan, right? Or Mrs. Vegan. I don't know, what do my kids call you? Nanny, right? That's nice. That's like an endearing name, right? So we have to be careful because the younger generation has lost all like more like respect. There's no respect for elderly, right? Yes. Wow. I wonder if he even knew it. I wonder if he even knew his name. He did know it. Yeah. Yeah.
Emily, when I got married, I immediately called my in-laws.
Mm.
But my son-in-law calls us
Totally. Right. Right. It's hard. It's hard to get to adapt to like the change in the society. And yeah, I'll tell you guys a little dilemma that I'm having in my head. It's not a dilemma. If I would talk this through with my husband, he'd be like, what are you talking about? We've already had this conversation. Okay. But this is kind of crazy. So when my grandparents would come to visit us from Montreal to Toronto, they came all the time. My parents would move out of the master bedroom. Did anyone ever have that in their upbringing? My parents would move out of the master bedroom and my grandparents would sleep in their bed. My parents would move into like the bunk bed. And what that was the respect. That was the last generation. I remember when my parents were first coming to Israel when I was a married woman, they're coming to visit us. I said, God, if you need, we're going to move into the guest room, right? He was like, what are you talking about? He said that would be so disrespectful. We would no. Like he just didn't have that growing up. And so, yeah, some of you are nodding your heads. It seems a little crazy. My parents are coming now. And my husband's like, we'll put them in the basement. I'm like, we cannot put them in the basement. Like, because it's like a cultural thing. Okay, so I want to end with two little things because I know we really went over time, but two things really important to end with. Okay, so one, if we go back last week, I used the example of Yosef and the wife of Potiphar. Do you remember that example? That Potiphar tried to get him in his weakness. She held him in his beged, his big dough, his clothing, beged, the word traitor. She said, you're such a traitor. You're such a fake. Come on, just sleep with me. It'll all be good. You're in Egypt. You're in the pit of immorality anyways. Remember that example we gave? What was it that Joseph did or saw or felt that gave him the strength to not give in to his desires? He thought of his father. His father's face was right there. And that's something that we need to pass that on. Like, how do we instill our morals and our values to the next generation? That when they're in that moment, they're thinking, wait, hold on a second. What would my father do? What would someone I revere do? That's what I'm going to do. Okay, so that was one example to tie it closed. Now, one more thing to end with. This mitzvah of respecting parents, it's likened to respecting God. Okay, it's on the same, it's huge. It's actually, when we spoke about in the first class, the 10 commandments, we have the list between man and God and man and man. And the number 5 is on the wrong list. It's on the between man and God side. And it's because when we respect our parents, we can understand what it's like to respect something higher, to fear something like God. That is our connection. And there are 3 partners in the creation of a child. It's a triangle. God, the mother, and the father. We need the egg, we need the sperm, and we need God. Actually, this is one of the things that is said to be one of the keys that God holds. He holds the key to so many things. But listen, and today with all the technology and all the medical advancements, most people that are struggling with infertility can have a child, but not everybody. You could try everything, but God holds the key. God, the mother, the father, that's what it takes to bring a child into this world. So there's such a huge parallel between honoring your parents and honoring God. And can I end with one more little story? Okay, if you have to go, go. One more little story, but this is just about, in general, about honoring our elders. So this is a story that happened, it was on an airplane, okay? On an airplane to Israel, great sage, can't remember which one it was, but he was with his grandson sitting next to him, and he had all his students around him, and everyone was like, Rabbi, are you okay? Can I bring you some water? And this guy sitting in the same aisle, he came over to him, he's like, what's the big fuss? Like, why are you going crazy over this old man? And he just didn't understand to the level of respect that was given. Like, they would stand for him. The whole flight, there were people like sitting and attending to this elderly man. So this is what the grandson said. He said, in your belief system, it could be that the older you get, the closer you are to evolution, to monkeys. But in our belief system, the older you get, the closer you are to the beginning of creation, to receiving the Torah on Mount Sinai. And that's really why there's a very different structure here. We're not coming from monkeys, we're coming from greatness. So that's why honoring the elders, our parents, is so vital in our whole belief system as Jews. The older you are, the closer you are to a much more powerful experience as a Jewish people. Okay, so I'll end over there. Thank you so much. Happy Thanksgiving. Thank you so much for coming. Please take challah and soup. And okay, great. And Julie, if you want to bring out the bags, we have bags. You can take it in a colorful bag and bring it to someone.
Bye, everyone. Thank you so much. Thank you. Stop recording.